In the very first lecture in this course, I provided you with an introduction to DevOps and described what DevOps was from a methodology standpoint. And just as a quick refresher, when I talk about DevOps, I'm really describing a collaborative effort within the organization. It's more of a culture that we implement, and its focus is on improving the quality and the velocity of our service delivery lifecycle. So you think about DevOps, it plays a role in all of the different phases of software development. Everything from the inception and planning stage to the actual code execution and building, to the testing stage, and then to the release stage, and finally to the deployment stage, where now we're deploying and we're operating and maintaining our service platform. DevOps brings together many disparate parts of the organization so that they can collaborate around the effort of supporting our software. Sometimes the best way to describe something is to describe what it isn't. And one of the challenges that we face when we talk about DevOps is that if you go out and talk to nearly any company or any IT vendor, they'll give you a slightly different definition of what DevOps means to their organization. Some companies will say that DevOps represents part of the software release process or the deployment process. Some companies will say that essentially DevOps is no different than what their operations team is currently doing. Vendors will tell you that they have a DevOps tool because it supports continuous integration. And while all of these sort of perceptions might be true to some extent, I think it's important for you and for us as we are really studying DevOps to try to understand all of the different components that go into making up the DevOps methodology and a DevOps culture within an organization. And in order to do that, I wanted to start by dispelling some common misconceptions about DevOps. Probably the first misconception, and probably the most common one that I encounter in the marketplace, is that companies tell me that in order to implement DevOps practices in their organization, they need to go out and hire special DevOps people. They need to build a DevOps team and hire DevOps engineers. And that's just simply not true. DevOps is really all about breaking down the various silos within organizations. And as we'll see shortly, there's generally a sort of a partition that's formed between our development and operations teams. And those two teams operate in separate silos. The goal of DevOps is to try to get those teams to collaborate closer together. So if you wanted those teams to collaborate closer together, why would you go out and build yet another team? Now, I say this, and the fact is that I've worked in organizations that have DevOps teams, and I've actually held the title of DevOps engineer at least once in my career. But again, those organizations chose to create DevOps teams oftentimes before I joined, and I don't believe it was necessary. And we'll look at why. But one of the key reasons is that in order for DevOps to be successful in organizations, it has to be something which is embraced by all team members within the technology organization. And if you have one special team that's focused on DevOps, then what will happen inevitably is that you'll have software developers who will say that, well, gee, I don't need to implement these DevOps practices. That's That's the DevOps team job to do that stuff. And that's simply not true. In order to build a successful DevOps culture and organization, you need everyone in the organization to be invested to a certain extent in DevOps methodologies. The second common misconception is that these DevOps methodologies, they're really just focused on automating everything. And in order to build a successful DevOps practice, then all I need to do is just focus on automating tasks which are currently performed manually. And while automation is an important component in a DevOps practice, it's not the most important component. I would say that the actual culture that forms around DevOps, the collaboration that is created between disparate parts of the organization, and the shared accountability and responsibility for service delivery, which is promoted by DevOps, these concepts are far more important than just simply automating everything. And finally, if you talk to software vendors in the marketplace, and if you look at their marketing materials, then you'll be led down a path to thinking that DevOps is just focused on tooling, and that if your organization is using these quote-unquote DevOps tools, then that means that your organization is following DevOps practices. And that's not the case either. You can't build a DevOps culture, a DevOps practice in your organization, based around software tools. Software tools, I think, can help support collaboration. They can make it easier, but they don't. They won't force two teams to get together and start talking, and they won't change the way that humans behave. So the cultural aspects of the DevOps practices might be supported by tools, but tools are not going to create a DevOps culture. So how do we build a DevOps organization? What sort of components should we be looking for in a DevOps practice? Well, one of the most common ways to look at DevOps practices is to look at the CALMS framework. And CALMS is an acronym which stands for Culture, Automation, Lean, Measurement, and Sharing. All of these are components which make up the DevOps methodology. And I want to walk through each one of these components during the remainder of this lecture. Now, I'm going to combine both the culture and the sharing components together because I think they are fairly similar, and just to make this lecture a little shorter. So I'll cover culture and sharing, then lean, automation, and measurement.